Joining me on the channel today is Malavika Kannan, author of The Bookweaver's Daughter, available now from Tanglewood. It's a YA fantasy about a girl who can channel magic and must weave a story to save her homeland from the clutches of a cruel king. Welcome, Malavika. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
As I was researching, I saw that you had written this when you were 17. Is that right?
That is true. Thank you. Yeah.
That is fantastic and amazing because, like, I don't think, that you were able to write something so great and then get it published at such a young age. That's super rare. I've been talking to a lot of authors, and usually they say, like, it's taken 10 years to get published and revising, and you started out so young. That's incredible. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was, what kind of kid were you and your path to deciding to become a writer?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still very much like at the beginning of my journey. I'm currently 19 years old, so I still very much feel like I am in like my fetus stage as a writer. But I think that I was very much the kind of kid that I still am now as a young adult, which is like super curious, always like in love with literature, like very like unapologetic and loud and opinionated at times, but also like very passionate about like community and sisterhood. Like I feel like I've been like an eternal like big sister as like the oldest daughter of immigrants. So I feel like in those ways I'm very much the same.
And what kind of books did you like as a kid?
Yeah, so my first love as a kid has always been fantasy, right? Like I grew up with like the Harry Potter books. I like devoured all of Rick Riordan and Cornelia Funk's books, and later on, like more when I was in high school, like Roshni Chokshi's books. And when I was in elementary and middle school, I was like very much in love with like the mainstream YA like dystopian novels. Like I very much had like a Tumblr account and like a fan Instagram page. And while when I was younger, there weren't a ton of young adult fantasy books by authors of color. I was very much still in love with like this like canon of stories by like Sandra Cisneros and like Jacqueline Woodson and like Sharon M. Draper. And later on in high school and college, I've kind of, in addition to reading YA, have very much fallen in love with this like feminist canon of like women of color writers like Toni Morrison, Jhumpa Lahiri, Amy Tan, and so on.
And you're a political activist too. When did you start becoming active as an activist?
Yeah, so I became really involved in politics when I was in around 11th grade of high school. A couple of like events really kind of like awakened and radicalized me. One was the Pulse shooting in my hometown of Orlando, the 2016 election, and also the Parkland shooting in South Florida. So I became very involved in the youth gun violence space. I'm joining forces with a bunch of young people who were tired of living in fear of gun violence and wanted to take matters into our own hands. Like it was very much almost like the same kids who were like reading those young adult dystopian novels. Like we were now rising up against like oppression in our own lives and standing up for people of color and survivors of gun violence and taking on some like really powerful interests.
Yeah, I love that about your generation. You're the most politically active generation, and that can't help but go into your books. So you bring some of your political activism into your books?
For sure. I think definitely this like kind of ethos of activism, right? Like centering powerless people's voices, like amplifying those most marginalized, like using storytelling as a form of power, I think like guides me in activism and in writing.
So what was your path from going from a reader to wanting to write your first book?
Yeah, so I've been writing since childhood. So like really shortly after I started reading, I was writing my first stories as a kid. And that's something I've always been doing. Like my mom has definitely saved all the stories I wrote in elementary school and middle school, including when I was 11. Like I wrote like a fan fiction sequel to the Harry Potter series. But I wrote my first draft of the Bookweaver's Daughter when I was in middle school, actually. And it was something I did like with no intention of publication. It was a project just for me. I honestly like did it in secret. Like I would come back from school and like go at it like on the Word document. But when I was in high school and I started reading writing by other women of color authors, I became really serious about publication and writing and finishing this novel. Like I kind of suddenly like saw the power of myself as like a writer and a storyteller. So I actually went back to this book that I had written as a young person and kind of abandoned, and came back to it, and I like completely like rewrote it and like brought new life to it, and was very intentional this time about centering like South Asian mythology and South Asian inspired worlds in it.
Love it. And can you tell us about the day that you found out your book was going to be published? What was that like?
Yeah, so I was in my senior year of high school when I found out my book was going to be published. I just finished my freshman year of college. I remember it was like very early in the year, like August, and I was in my biology class, and I got an email from my current publisher telling me that like an intern had picked my book out of like thousands, like in their like submissions pile, and they loved it. And I remember at the time, like I was surprised, but I was also like in class, right? So I just like whispered to my friend who was texting me like, "Hey, I think I'm getting a book published." And I texted it in my family group chat, and that was it. I think at the time I didn't realize what a big deal it was, because I mean none of us thought very much of it, because like as like a young person, like there are no writers in my family, like my parents are immigrants. Like we didn't realize what a big deal it was until like a while later, and we sat down and we're like, "Oh my gosh, like a book is coming out."
That's hilarious because like, okay, I've been interviewing lots of people about getting their book deal, and it's always like, oh, I was at work, I was in a conference room, and you were like, you're the only case where you're like, you're literally in high school, in a high school class, and you're finding out that you get a book deal, and that's amazing. Okay, so this is your chance to pitch your book. Tell us all about it.
Yeah. So my novel, The Bookweaver's Daughter, is an Owen Voice's young adult feminist fantasy novel that is inspired by Indian mythology and set in like a fictional kingdom inspired by South Asia. And it is steeped in magic and radical female friendship. And it follows a 15-year-old protagonist named Rhea Kandari, who learns that she is the latest in this long legacy of bookweavers, or people who can use writing to like bring magic to life. And when her kingdom is overtaken by like an oppressive regime that outlaws magic, she realizes that it's up to her to kind of live up to that ancestral power and destiny and weave her own story and fight back against that oppression.
Love it. What's your favorite step when it comes to writing? Is it drafting or revising?
Definitely drafting. I feel like drafting is just like running down a hill full speed without having to really watch where you're going. And like revisions is when it becomes more serious.
Yeah. What has been one revision tip that you got along the way that has been most helpful for you?
Yeah, I think with this book specifically, something that I was really like working on in revisions was almost like not underselling my main character. I think that when you write like a main character who you very much identify with, you're like tempted to not give them credit and not let them live up to their full potential and almost make them weaker than they have to be. So I think allowing my main character to take more control of the story.
Mhm. And are you a perfectionist or a chaos artist?
I am a perfectionist and I'm trying to grow out of it.
And do you have a huge ego, or are you humble and demure?
I think as like a young woman of color, I know the importance of externally advocating for myself and showing my worth and like knowing like to flex when I have to. But I still think that like internally, like I'm still working on all of that with like imposter syndrome and all that.
Yeah, we it's like definitely something you have to fight against,
For
because
sure.
especially too in the industry you get so much, negative feedback, and you get so many no's along the way, and so having that, being able to self advocate is so important. And are you a morning writer or an evening writer?
Definitely an evening writer. I'm usually not up like before 9 a.m.
Yeah. And are you a plotter or a pantser?
Plotter for sure. I don't know how people pants.
And do you focus on the character first or the plot first?
I would say both because I think they're pretty inextricable from each other.
And would you ever like to be famous?
Not until I'm like a lot older, I would say, but I do think like at least as an activist, like I would love to be able to have a larger platform to be able to help people and crowdsource and like educate.
And if you could have any one non-supernatural quality or ability, what would it be?
Well, I would say like to heal people and like reduce suffering. I don't know if that's supernatural or not. If not, I would say just like a lot of money to like redistribute and like fight climate change with.
Yeah, that actually, extreme wealth is totally a non-supernatural quality. And I'm
Yeah, for
surprised no
sure.
one has said that before. But yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I think yeah, that could definitely be used and redistributed in a lot of helpful ways for the world.
definitely. And what are you working on right now?
Yeah, right now I have my little secret project is I'm working on another novel about girls in Central Florida that I started for one of my classes in college last year.
Awesome. And you're at Stanford now, right?
I am, yes. I just finished my freshman year.
Congratulations. What are you studying?
I am an English major and I'm minoring in comparative studies in race and ethnicity, which is a bit of a mouthful.
That's awesome. Well, and writing while being in college, much less Stanford, I'm sure is like a lot on your plate, like a lot to juggle.
Well, actually, it's kind of been the first time that I've been able to prioritize writing in my life because that's like what I'm studying. So I think it's actually been very freeing to allow myself to like completely like live and breathe writing and get like credit for the things I would be doing regardless.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you so much for being on the channel, and buy links will be below, and links to your social media and your website and all of that will be below as well. So check out everyone, the Bookweaver's Daughter. Thank you so much for being on the channel.
Thank you so much for having me.